you being here and attending the workshop and still being here. I'm now in the kind of uncomfortable position that I will speak about a project that I am about to prepare. As Susan has mentioned, I just finished my PhD and I'm now trying to look for new routes into academia, whether into or not. And this is could be one path I'm going to follow. I've just recently come across some source materials and some institutions that might be worth following. As I said yesterday already in the introduction, this is somehow or might somehow be embedded in the larger ideas we will try to fix on political epistemologies. And so I will now just present some material mostly and see where it gets us. And I'll be grateful for comments, recommendations for literature, or also if you have the feeling that you need to put the thumbs down, just tell me so. I look for to get all this on another path. So I have come to this topic from a project on science studies in interwar Poland, especially Warsaw. So another workshop you have not mentioned was a workshop we organized in 2015 in Constance, where we were looking at the group that was working around the journal, the Warsawian journal, published in Warsaw from 1939 until I think 45. Karl had yesterday in his presentation the journal Nauka Polska, Polish science, or I don't know, Polish scholarship. And there we had the as Karl said yesterday, they were covering international developments and national, but also international organizations of science and a lot of other things. And they also published the proceedings of the Science of Science Circle, Kołno-Poznawcze, a working group that met from, I think, the late 20s until 1939, where people or scholars interested in, from all the disciplines, interested in the organization and the basics of science, like the epistemology, if I might say so. They met there, discussed, and tried to, and later also published their many of their texts in the journals. Among these people who were in there were, for example, the eminent scholar from Warsaw, who was also very important after the war, and the philosopher who I think in the early 50s published, or from the early 50s on, concentrated on praxeology, rather from a philosophical point of view. And another very important text, I think, that has been mentioned here not only once, the text Science of Science, by Maria Semper-Kosowski, which was published in 1935 in Polish, and in 1936, I think, in another journal, also published by this the same company. From the surroundings of the Science of Science Circle. There was a journal called Organon, which in 1937, I think. From there, this text of the Osowski's Science of Science went out into the world. It was published again in 1964, 65, 1982, and hopefully 2018 in our conference volume, which should be coming later this year. In 1965, it was published in, I think, the Minerva Journal. In the aftermath of the International Congress of the History of Science, if I'm correct, that took place in 1964 in Warsaw, where Derek Price mentioned this article very prominently or very emphatically. And so this is, so what I'm basically trying to say is that this text made its way into international discussions, and especially to the West. But there were also other people referring to these texts from Warsaw, and especially the text by the Osowskis, and I'm thinking about Gennady Mikhail Dadov, who was a director to the Institute of, I think, Kybernetics at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, somewhere from the 60s or late 50s, I guess. And so this is one observation I made, that everybody's, all these people from very different, I don't know, systems, if you painted like with the colors of the Cold War narrative, then still all of these scholars or scientists of science, or how would you say that? How would you say in Russian somebody who does no good in yet? Okay. All of these somehow trace themselves back to not only the text by the Osowskis, but also others from this area. And of course, they also have other sources, but this is one very important thing. So there might be some connections, or this is actually that's what I'm interested in. And then, yeah, and so then I tried to look a bit further. So I went to Germany, to the library in Germany, and tried to look what I found some sources in German material, and then I came across several texts by Dobrov, for example. So this seminal work on Naukovedenie that was published in the 60s was translated by an institute, or in the vicinity of this institute, for theory, history, and organization of sciences, or I think a foreign institution. And they, in the foreword to this book by Dobrov, to the German translation, the author again refers back to Osowskis and so on. And then a bit later, another thing I came across, which I found extremely interesting, is this one, Wörterbuch der Wissenschaftswissenschaft, or also in English it's Russian, German, English Dictionary of Science Policy Studies, which was published in 1979, so a bit later than the frame we have for our workshop, but still. It was followed by a second revised and enlarged edition in 1984, and this is a project that, as you can see, tries to bridge like any border you might think of. I'm quoting the preface. This dictionary is a result of a long joint work of science policy studies specialists of the USSR and the GDR. In their work, the compilers could lean on the experience of the long-term research work of the Science Policy Studies Division of the Institute of Cybernetics of the Academy of Sciences of the Ukrainian SSR in Kiev, as well as one more than 10-year teaching and research work experience of the Department of science theory and science organization of the Humboldt University, the long titles. The dictionary contains about 7,000 special terms in Russian from the field of science policy studies, and then in brackets, Naturvidenja, Wissenschaft, with approximately 10,000 German English equivalents. And then they further, they write, the authors write, in accordance with the UNESCO scheme, such a set of disciplines studying various aspects of science includes theory of science, history of science, various logical, heuristic, mathematical, and systematic methods of research and scientific developments, including computerized ones, management, planning and forecasting, economics of science, informatics, studying science information aspects, sociology, and finally sociology of science and creativity studies. So this is one of these sources which I think are extremely interesting, and I don't know yet much about the how many versions, copies they printed and where it was distributed, but I think the idea itself, and they at least the more than 10-year teaching and research work they claim to have put in there, is something which is at least remarkable. There was not only there were not only activities in Eastern Germany, and especially in Eastern Berlin, as you might expect. There were also many institutions that were working on similar things or had similar agendas. I'd like to point to present or briefly present two of them. At Bochum University, there was a working group, Wissenschaft, Naturvidenja, or the Science of Science working group, which published a memorandum for the advancement of Wissenschaft, or Science of Science, in 1933. It's a 200-page long pamphlet with listing all the institutions or working groups or whatever that work on Wissenschaft or similar fields in Western Germany, and then they have attachments with information on basically all over Europe, I would say, but also the United States or North America. And in this one, I came across one institute in Erlangen, which is in Bavaria, close to Nuremberg, which was called Institute für Geschichte der Gesellschaft und Wissenschaft, Institute for Society and Sciences, which was founded in the early 70s, where from 1972 on until 1991, so-called Werkstattgespräche, to translate that, I would say, workshops were organized on an annually. This institute was government funded by the Ministry of Research, but also funded by economic associations. And what's interesting about these Werkstattgespräche is that they had always had guests from beyond the eastern border. So there was, like, I think every time there was at least 2 or 3 people from the institute in Eastern Berlin, where on which Sascha will say a couple of words, or he will go more into detail with that. And also people from scholars from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary, and also from the Balkans, I think. And once in the I think in '75, also Gennady Lavrov was there, presenting on his Novova. Well, okay. Then I would like to quote, or there was one other meeting which was not part of the Werkstattgespräche, but that was, I think, in 1987, where this group, or a similar group, or at least it was organized by these people who organized the Werkstattgespräche. They met in, I think, in Western, in Hungary, and talked about philosophy of techniques across again in both systems, and in the publication afterwards, or it's more reminiscent by the two scholars from this Erlangen Institute. They wrote, the authors wrote that all these scholars from the West and the East, that's how they write it, got to the conclusion that it's important to cross the trenches of ideology, that's how they write it, and talk about what is not part and not influenced by these ideologies, and which, of course, as you might guess, is science. So this is not anymore, perhaps, thought to be the realm which is not influenced by ideology, or that there's at least some area within these realm of science which is probably not influenced by ideology. And this is a decision they come up with. And when I remember, if I remember correctly, Sascha spoke yesterday, he had this this thesis in the end that I think in the 60s, he said, the epistemology was depoliticized. And then, of course, this is I'm not sure whether we can say that this depoliticization means that it is not political anymore on an analytic point of view, speaking as a political epistemologist, as we try to frame it. But I think what's very interesting is in this material I presented is that they try to say that themselves, so that in the sources they realize the political influence on epistemology or science, and try to look for a bridge across these trenches. Yeah, and this is my what I wanted to say about these materials I have, and I think this is there is some trajectory in there from the early 50s, as I think, or even earlier, as I got from the talk yesterday, during which I learned really a lot. And this trajectory would be one signifies, and I don't want to get too deep into this right now, but I think it could be worthwhile to think about this, about science as something that was that they tried to install as an anti-signifier, if I may borrow so easily from the club. Okay, thank you.
Great, so let's give directly Sascha, and then we'll have questions for both.
If you don't know, London Institute for the History of Science, we have been and began this project, which is a kind of a side project. It's also a work in progress. But right now I'm at the University of Venice, a research fellow there, and I'm a research fellow at an ERC group concerned with actually early modern cosmology. But we try to establish also a line of research in political epistemology. So I was called there for exactly this purpose. So I have to say something. And what I want to present is a kind of case studies in, but maybe also for or as political epistemology, because the entanglements of the political and sciences, and science becoming more and more fuzzy at the borders, so to say, of course manifold, but there are kind of two attitudes maybe towards this concept of political epistemology, which was coined by Yehuda Elkanah, at least to my knowledge. Since a few years is taken up by especially historians of science and people interested in historical epistemology. So I think there's an immediate feeling of researchers in the field that maybe this kind of history of science or broad history of knowledge became a little bit too depoliticized in a way, or in the sense which Sascha also hinted at, that there is a clear distinction. So I think what our immediate reaction is kind of, we want to look into the kind of connections which already form research programs. So there are two attitudes, either affirmative, we want to propose it as a research line, or maybe even more skeptical, more disapproving line of research. I guess, yes, so what I will present is kind of a history of science studies reflecting on the reflection on science. And what this has to do with political epistemology, we can speak about. I, for one, want to leave it a little bit open also to discussion, and also in order to be open to your propositions where this project can lead, especially in terms of the comparative dimension. I'm coming from philosophy, so for me to work in this way is kind of, I mean, in a disciplinary sense, unusual, but for me it doesn't feel like. So one of the inspiring publications in the field was from 2006, Elena Aronova. I think we mentioned her yesterday already, published a nice collection of essays connected volumes of science studies during the Cold War and beyond. I think the Cold War period is also kind of objective in the feeling that we need to have a kind of political historic epistemology, because it's still like a barrier in a way in many respects in the field of the history of science, which was pretty much established after the Second World War. And I don't want to go into detail with historical epistemology also because, as we already talked about yesterday, in order to get a more clear understanding of what, for example, this kind of political agenda in respect to science studies with a Marxist approach is, I think, is a kind of even it's a topic on its own. I will hint at this in my talk, because I will speak about the East German and the West German institution. So the official Marxism plays a role, of course, but it's always the matter. We had it in our discussion yesterday. I think very clearly we saw that Marxism is not like Marxist philosophy, and then it's also like who actually has the hegemony at the time, who is leading the way, which strain has the power at the moment, but also it's a bigger issue of limits of reflection, of reflective disciplines. So in order not to get too much into that, I just say that I try to present my cases here not so much as being close to politics, which they were. There were a lot of political influence involved, and also not as inherent political endeavors, which they were also. Even in the East, they had their own agenda distinguishing themselves from the official party line, so to say. But it's not in those cases what I want to hint at, but they both were reflective endeavors, so to say, philosophical endeavors, I would say. Both institutions I will talk about, namely the ITW in East Germany and the Max Planck Institute in Starnberg, were founded by mostly learned philosophers. So philosophers going into the field of science studies in a very broad sense. So we had this, and this we had already. 1968 is in my title. I think it's enough to show, just show the number of the year, because it already suggests so many also political, scientific events. But I think it's still not so much maybe it's not in the public awareness so much that 1968 in the East meant at least, if not more, than in the West. Because nowadays, or some years ago at least, we have this theory of 50 years, 68, and it's about the old 68ers, the student protests, of course. But the invasion in Czechoslovakia, we also think of course, had a consequence which was on a I think, ideological level, if you want to call it that, devastating to the whole Eastern Bloc. So all, at least the cases I know from philosophy, from thinkers and writers who were engaged Marxists for 68, this was a total disaster. And afterwards, a lot of them became very skeptical about further developments. The East and West comparison I want to propose then is, as I said, between the Institute for Theory, History and Organization of Science at the Academy of the Sciences in the GDR. It was based in East Berlin. And the Max Planck Institute for it's the inquiry of the living conditions in the scientific technical world. It was proposed by Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker. He was a physicist, so he had nice formulations always. But I want to point your attention to this concept of wissenschaftlich-technische Welt. I mean, that's a totalizing concept. That the world we live in is the scientific technical world. We come back to that in a minute. So not in order to go too far into the field of the historical context, I want just to give you some hints on how actually the science of science, especially in East Germany, because this history is much less known than the West German case, was actually established. And I just put three important points here. One, of course, was the ongoing debate with Western scientists, sympathetic towards Marxism, like Bernal. His Science and Society was also for East German, for East European and Middle and East European scientists and scholars, very, very important. In '66, there was a special publication, republication of the Russian translation, especially for honor the work of Bernal. Also very influential was Little Science, Big Science of the Solar Prize, not only in his the methods he proposed, namely the psychometric or quantifying statistical methods, but more even to raise the awareness about the actual development of science, that science, so to say, entered a new phase. This was used by the Eastern scholars a lot. And the Solar Prize was also, as was Bernal, present at the meetings in 65 and 66. They all, as was Mikulinsky and Rodny from Moscow, from the Institute. And these were meetings where already the kind of East-West exchange was established. So this is the kind of framework of exchange which led also to the East German development. And what's of course for the East German case important too is that in '61 there was a kind of very surprising party program formulated, which postulated the development of science as an immediate force of production. I don't know if it's a good translation. In German it would be Entwicklung der Wissenschaft zur unmittelbaren Produktivkraft. So science is a means of production immediately. It's not like only a step towards production, it immediately produces something. But in order to produce this something and to organize it, you need to understand it. So, especially in the 60s, the awareness and the needs for developing science of science in a very broad sense was felt all over the Western and the Eastern world. And one crucial work was, of course, the report, the so-called Richter report, which also had the scientific technical revolution as a core concept. The report done actually by, I think, 40 something scholars, led by Radovan Richter of the Academy of Sciences in Prague. This report was published in many languages, also appeared in German, and very, the translation appeared very shortly after the original report. So I think the original was in 67 or something like this. And then 68 already was a German and English translation, and it was translated in many languages, Spanish and so on. And what the research team of Richter could show, could prove also with statistics, with a lot of means actually. They came from very different backgrounds, but of course the statistics were always very convincing to the politicians. Also, was actually connected with what we saw in the name of the Max Planck Institute, namely that we live in a world which is not anymore the world of the first industrialization, but so to say a second one. Whereas the first industrialization was driven by, so to say, external growth. Now the concept of internal growth, of intensive growth, was postulated for the development of what they called the scientific technical revolution. It's not so clear. I think the borders of this concept are also very fuzzy. I think what they actually meant was a very broad and global development. It was not at all something which was only to be seen in Western or more developed countries, but actually all over the world. How, for example, in the third world countries at the time were introduced new technologies with the help of, for example, the socialist brother states. How can you develop a country with the means of new technology? This was a crucial global issue, but what appealed most to especially the Central European governments of the Eastern Bloc was the postulation that this kind of intensive growth can develop best in a society where science is fully developed and fully backed, so to say, where science is a worldview. Yeah? And this kind of intensive growth also connotated that you don't have to be expansive with a lot of resources, for example, which was an issue for all the Central European countries. They were dependent on the Soviet Union for a lot of, especially raw goods, or also oil and so on. So they always had the problem, the resource problem. So now they saw, oh, there's a new resource to be developed. so to say, a renewable energy, mainly the creativity of the scientist. So this was, of course, appealing to them. I can maybe come back here to that. Yes. Now to the German cases. There, the institutions for the science of science were actually founded very late in comparison to other countries. I think in Poland it was 63 when they had it at the Academy of the Sciences, and also at the beginning of the 60s, Richter and his research group began their work. So it was especially in 68, so this is another reason why I put it in my title. In the course of 1 month, official bodies in East as well as in West decided to establish research institutes dedicated exclusively to science studies, but science studies in a very broad sense. And as I said, in both cases, the researchers, the scholars came mostly from philosophy. Before it was the ITW in Berlin was founded, there appeared, the year before appeared this book, Wissenschaft von der Wissenschaft, which can be seen for anybody who's interested in as a kind of programmatic attempt. It was not at all, sorry, it's cut there, I don't know why. It had nothing to do with the developments in Berlin at the Academy of Sciences, but were the collective work of philosophers in Leipzig. And there in Leipzig was the, so to say, the source for everything epistemological in Marxism in the GDR. Maybe it was one of the best, or the best philosophical institutes where they really tried to put forward a serious alternative to Western epistemology. What is a Marxist epistemology? They on and on they went and they had fights with the officials over this kind of conception. I just want to point to you, also only for those who are interested in that people who were involved later on went different directions, but they all more or less remained staunched Marxists. And another very important publication is this, the experimentelle Methode, so the experimental method in the sciences and the sciences of nature and society, and there it was proposed that actually there's a difference between the experimental method, like in a broader sense, and particular experiments, and this kind of experimental method can actually be institutionalized and applied in social matters too. So this was a very famous proposition at the time, but as with all these things I show you, actually you have to keep in mind these were at the same time marginal things, and they were just philosophers. So the ITW then was founded, actually founded in June of 1917. It was abolished after the reunification or unification, how do you want to call it, and ended together with the Academy of the Sciences of the GDR in 1991. There you see the picture where they were based in Prenzlauer Berg in Berlin. At first they just had these kind of reports, published. This is the very first one, and this one I put there to show you that they also very much try to keep in contact with the Kulinski's institute in Moscow. They had a lot of these bilateral conferences. Yes, and this is the very first one. This is the statement, what they want to put there. This is still very, very, very narrowly formulated. Later on, they made a much bigger position because they actually had to bridge the gap between reflective work and application, or as it was called, the organization of science. They had to make actual reports to the party, where some of them had to be present at party congresses in order to directly influence the science politics. These are some of the later publications. This was the first one in this series. In this series appeared a lot of translations of the Soviet sciences, especially of the IIT in Moscow, and special thing for their research was also this concept of Schöpfertum, which is really strange concept in German. It sounds almost theological, but it's actually the translation of tvorчество, creativity, and was meant as a means to what I already hinted at, to develop the resource of thinking in the end. So they had very different kinds of studies in these books, from psychological to bibliometrical, how you organize your research, very practical sometimes. Well, these books are actually, for everybody who's interested in the field of science studies, very interesting. But the most important publication, I think, is this one. It only appeared in 1988, but it's a collective, it's so to say, the summa of the Eastern science studies. So as you see, all the big names are in there. Kulinski is not there, but he was very, he's there, and Richter, and Kröber and Leiko from East Germany, especially Hubert Leiko was one of the best philosophers in this institute. So this, I think, is the first attempt to really propose an encompassing foundation of what they call Wissenschaftsforschung, so research of science. And their methods ranged from the metrical, statistical methods to very qualitative analysis, psychological experiments, and so on. And as you can see here, it's rather systematically ordered. So it's very interesting. If you read it, you are just amazed how fresh this is. At least when I read it, it's like, oh yeah, it could be like from today in a way. What's also interesting is that they always problematized the development of science. So they were charged to develop science and the scientific dynamics, and they always kind of failed. So they had to reflect on what's wrong. Something is not working. So they had to really this kind of problematic, of course, in a rather abstract way, incorporated into their research program. I think this is what makes it also interesting. It's not like a straightforward Marxist-Leninist apologetics of the state or something like this. No, it's really an effort to develop science because they really were convinced that that's a good way. And to have science also in a very broad meaning, also having the humanistic sides. Yeah, sorry for that. Somehow the presentation is a little bit confused. But it says MPE Starnberg, so Max Planck Institute, as I said, for the inquiry of the living conditions of the scientific technical world. It was founded in 1970, so at the same time, now you don't see it how it ended, but it ended for this kind of institution at the Max Planck Institute, at the Max Planck Society immediately. After 10 years, it was totally abolished. So at the first chance, they abolished it. Because also when it got institutionalized, there were already a lot of resistance. The Max Planck Society is a federal body, so there are a lot of different groups of interests there. So there were fierce, really fierce protests of people who worked for BASF and Höchst. Oh, why? We come back to that when we have a look at what von Weizsäcker actually proposed for the program. And it was only because I think in the end it was Heisenberg who made the kind of veto. No, it has to be, otherwise I won't go on with the MD physics in Munich anymore. Something like this. I don't know. It's unofficial, this kind of veto. But so it was founded against a lot of resistance already, and when they had the chance, they abolished it again. And why, we will see. But the interesting thing for us, I think, is the memorandum of Friedrich von Weizsäcker, who wrote the first of several memorandums actually in 1st November of '67, and there he made actually the same analysis than Richter and others had done before, that we live in a world that's endangered and that there are limits of growth, but also the Club of Rome, which was founded at the same time in '68 and '72, I think, in their report, so famously claimed. So he proposed a very broad inquiry into how science and technical means are connected and how these are entangled with our actual livelihood, our actual everyday life. So they had a program which is crazy if you look at it. It reached from sociology and economics to quantum physics. Really. I mean, the core was this kind of critical endeavor of what we call today maybe sociology of science and philosophy of science maybe. And sorry, there you see the report of the Max Planck Society when they announced that the new institute was founded, and then you can see that they have people from different disciplines, mathematics, logic, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, sociology, psychology, and philosophy, and the most of the people actually were from philosophy, but they put it at the end. So, and they actually were charged with looking into the developments in new theories, theories like systems analysis or systems theory, information theory, also game theory, and actually what Weizsäcker was proposing with his project was also a kind of futurologist, so a prognostics institute. So it's very broad, and of course you can see the end already of this. Here you can see a picture how they work. Actually, a lot of this of Weizsäcker's colleagues, younger colleagues, came from the student movements, but were not actually involved anymore. They were really not in this sense. Whereas the second director, which was called later on, 2 years later, 71 or 2, was Jürgen Habermas, and he brought with him a lot of broader Western Marxist sociologists, researchers. They were much more openly political in this sense, whereas this group wasn't, but it was especially this group which was interesting for the Eastern colleagues, and also which faced the most resistance publicly. And this was because of their finalization thesis. So maybe this was an unfortunate formulation, but what they wanted to propose with this thesis is something similar to what Thomas Kuhn had done, but they said, oh, he was too narrow in his developmental scheme. We of course see at first a kind of explorative phase in the sciences, then a kind of stabilizing, but then in the end we have a finalized science, and this finalized science is a science which just works. And finalized means not its ending, but it is a means to an end. So science becomes just a means to an end, and then it's of course the question: is it for the social orientation of science, or is it to the commercial? So they left it totally open. Actually, what they did was an analysis of the actual state of the sciences at the time. They made case studies of in chemistry, for example, and they showed actually that these scientific branches are finalized, are already, there's no development in the sense of Kuhn anymore. It's just production, means of production. But they were immediately, or almost immediately, attacked by a lot of people actually, not only corporate spokesmen or something like this, but even from the Bund für die Freiheit der Wissenschaft. This collection of people, they founded this Bund because they saw this kind of behavior of the students as a kind of threat actually to academical freedom and so on. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of rather conservative parties involved, party people involved, but also bigger names of the philosophical landscape in Germany, like Hermann Lübbe, who was actually interested in political philosophy. He was not at all. He was a kind of liberal or something. Was not at all a very staunch right-wing guy. But they had this quarrels because this finalization thesis was actually, and that's now the interesting point, it was immediately read as a political, as a normative proposition, as a kind of pamphlet or something like this, which it wasn't at all. It was just an analysis and a kind of, yeah, that's what we came up with kind of thing. No? It was not at all like this, but it had a lot of publications. There's a whole debate from, I think, 73 till 77 or something, over several years. They spanned this kind of debate. Well, we don't have much time. I will jump this. I think Friedrich already told you something about it. I just pointed you to this on the very right. This, I think it's a very nice formulation. Wissenschaft in the DDR, an experiment. It just shows that also, apart from this institute in Erlangen, where these kind of meetings of the East-West, of the Eastern and Western scholars took place, there was a broader interest in the academic landscape in West Germany, especially towards the science of science in the GDR. So they were, what's going on there, what they are doing. So this is I'm almost at the end. This is more like for discussion maybe, yeah? I mean, how can you evaluate abolished projects where even the people who were involved afterwards had the feeling they did not achieve the law? I think it is because they always had this idea that they do theoretical work which has an immediate effect, at least to the public in the West or to some party lines in the East, but they have. So then we can think about what is a kind of political epistemology in action worth actually. What can we actually do? Because as it seems, and Gerd also shows very nicely, this kind of mirroring of Western and Eastern perspectives and pointing to the others, and they were afar. This is a kind of rhetorical technique to convince a power which is much stronger than you. So I think we have to think about just the limits of these approaches. And actually, for me, it was, when I read these materials, it was always the feeling of, okay, these are failures, and the failure narrative is, of course, for example, in Ariane Render's publication, very present, whereas the former Eastern, and actually the Eastern, Reinhard Dworczak and Hubert Leitgeb were both philosophers of science from the East. They saw it as very productive, actually. They thought, yeah, that's what they did were actually pretty good. And Hubert Leitgeb wrote a very nice article on the concept of ambivalence in Weizsäcker's concept of science, of scientific development. He said, and for a dialectician, this is of course very easy to understand, he said that Weizsäcker actually had a contradictory concept of science. He said science is like the means for our development, but it's very dangerous at the same time. This kind of ambivalence is there. So I just wanted to show you some aspects of this kind of comparative study, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Put maybe very crude, but I suppose essential or simplistic but essential question about the social base and the maybe social target group of this project, especially for second goal. It's very good bridge to our next panel about the intellectuals, because, for example, Alexander Bibov would be saying mostly about the French case, but he also published a very good paper about the problem of personality in late Soviet Union as problem of Freyberg. Yeah? So for me, because I know something about soft side of these naukovedение treatments, very important and maybe crucial would be problem of engineers' work. And hidden elitism of this kind of production, for me, very open now. It is not the problem of open discussion in the 60s and during the 70s. But it's obvious that this kind of literature replaced the problematic of working class, for example, in Soviet Union. So the scientific technical intelligentsia, engineers, would be a social group who was the even target, and the problem of creativity of scientific works, it's not problem of working class and its motivation and its behavior on working class, but it is problem of another kind of skilled labor. So for me it's very essential to understand now from the distance maybe from more than 40 or 50 years, this problem of what is the social content of these ideas, and for me it's necessary to treat carefully, but to take an attention of what you think about the idea of social core of this concept.
Short answer. We can speak about this later on. I just want to put three, catchphrases into some catchphrases into the debate. First of all, what Lauren Graham said about the Soviet Union as the country with the most scientists in the world, and it was a development which which had the height in the 60s. So I think it in a sense it's not at all as the classical Marxist thinkers we like and value thought that this is only a positivistic and technocratic endeavor. So there were also a lot of people, especially in the cases of Germany, it's obvious in the East, it's very obvious that they were actually acting upon a crucial problem of society now. Second one, I already mentioned, technocracy. It's a problem of technocracy, of course, and this brings us to the critique of expert society. I think you hinted at that, and this is connected with a long tradition of a critique in the philosophy beginning with the pragmaticists. I mean, I think John Dewey was the one who already very early on put his finger especially on this problem. Do you want to develop people like, I now say in a Marxist sense, all rounded, like in a Bildung sense, or do you want to produce experts? You have to decide, and then you have to follow the education. So I think they were all also reflecting on this gap. They think so. But so to speak.
Let's just add that this Institute in Ireland was constantly fighting about for finance, and in the beginning they were only monitoring the GDR, collecting pretty much everything. They had a huge collection of everything that was published, assumingly on Science of Science or Wissenschaft of Wissenschaft. And then, when nobody was interested in it, they largely focused on Eastern Central Europe. There was Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. There was a tragedy to cut off the Soviet Union. And then in 1991, it was closed down because there wasn't of interest anymore, and they did not have any other competence or.
Great. I'm afraid we have to accumulate as many mentioned earlier. Actually two names, Dr. Zeleny and Conrad, who made an analysis of the scientific intelligence in the Eastern Bloc, and it would be really interesting to see I mean, it's not, of course, a controversial analysis, but it would be interesting to see if it in any way applies to the West German case, where obviously the social forces are very different. But now maybe we can accumulate questions starting with Anna, then Carol.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this melancholy treatment of political epistemology. It reminded me a bit of Karl Hall's talk, because I think in your talk one could smell the bomb somehow. So who gets to control the scientists and the Starnberg and I had that very much down as a as an endeavor to sort of make up for all the problems that really, so it has a bad consciousness from the beginning. So I wanted to ask whether when you read through the texts, whether there's any evidence that Weizsäcker and Heisenberg were involved in atomic research during the Hitler times and all that kind of thing. But the more general question would be, is there in these all-comprising topics of science, is there something like a media concurrence to the people involved in cybernetics that come via the computer way of thinking? I'm thinking about Georg Klaus in the Academy of Sciences, who has Walter Ulbricht pronounced programs on organization science that is clearly computer-based somehow. So is there a concurrence, or do they take it up? Is there any reflection on that?
Carol?
So let me lead off with something sort of seemingly narrow. I'm wondering if either of you has anything to say about what happens in Bielefeld, because that, I think, they've had a rather unfortunate trajectory. I think they once played an important role in what it meant to do science studies in West Germany and Germany writ large, and now that has petered off and come to an end. And I'd just be curious where they fit in your chronologies, if at all. But this brings me to a larger question. I'm sure many of you have read I'm sure many of you have read a polemical essay that Lorraine Daston wrote in 2009 about the relationship between science studies and history of science, right, in critical inquiry. She comes away from that thinking that history of science has gradually disciplined itself and now stands somewhat closer to a model of history. It's less eclectic than it used to be and so forth. Whereas science studies, however we want to construe that, is still much more present-oriented, thinks of itself self-consciously as interdisciplinary, and is much less disciplined. And that this is leading over time, according to her, to divergences in what our pictures of what our projects are. And Jasanoff and Cyril Jasanoff and Peter Deere responded in kind and said, no, mistakes are not in fact like that. But I wonder what we can do if we can use the kinds of materials you're talking here about, that both of you are talking about here, to kind of rework some of that polemic. Because when I think about my own training as a historian of science and which bits and pieces of some previous canon I was expected to be exposed to in order to think, how our methods became our methods. A bit of, in the Anglophone world, a bit of Merton, you read your Kuhn, and then you start the real debates with Latour and Bloor, and then move on from there, right? But I think it's, we need a different sort of narrative to build into our global picture here to get an understanding of political epistemology. I'm just wondering how we could sort of weave that back into this story. And what I fear here, right, is that with something like the Steinbeck Institute, it's in a subtle way, it has parallels with the debate of this phenomenon in the Anglophone world from the late 90s, or I should say maybe Anglo-French world, of science fairs, right, where you have a whole polemic that is seemingly targeted at science studies, but it's really a proxy for disagreements between different parts of the sciences about how priorities are changing. And the practitioners of science studies are saying, no, why are you accusing me? I don't have stakes in the kind of, this is a parody of what I do, and yet it's still meaningful for a shifting tensions among the scientific disciplines. Okay, so that's a little bit broad, but reflect on it as you like.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. I have a question that goes back to the melancholy that sort of sprang from your talk, especially Sascha. Lorraine Destin a while ago gave a paper on early history of science in the 1920s and 30s, and it seems a lot of the practitioners of that field then, if there is any sort of professionalized way, were people from the humanities that on the one had a very ambiguous relationship to their subject, in the sense that they saw science as a sort of engine of modernity, and they felt very lukewarm about that. Is this really a good thing? So there's this inbuilt sort of melancholy in the study of modernity and its engine. And somehow your treatment of the East and West German institution sort of conveyed that same sort of atmosphere. So I'm wondering if you would agree with that, or if there are maybe historical roots, because she talks about German scholars actually.
One short question about the context of the context of your both comparisons, where you're looking for the interconnection. That means, wouldn't it be necessary to look more European or more global concerning this? As you both mentioned, East European, Soviet, and GDR, and Western.
Okay, maybe 3 minutes.
Everyone else.
Maybe to the last and then backwards. At least in my case, it is the interest, actually, I think this maybe answers part of what you hinted at, namely the actual comparisons not only of the institutions but of the context. And I want this narrow comparison because, I mean, it can be done quite easily, actually. They are, of course, interrelations with others, especially with Moscow and Czechoslovakia at the time in the East. But I want this because actually I want to make a point about the comparison, namely that they do exactly the same and they analyze exactly the same phenomenon. So the contexts are not that different. The whole problem of technocracy is in a way much more evident in the East because its ideology kind of proposes to even, to even advance this strata of technical intelligentsia, but it's just more obvious. But it's the same when we see it in this framework of the scientific technical revolution, whatever that exactly is. I think today we use the word of digitalization or something like this, which is much more immediately understandable, but it means just another phase of this, what they actually proposed there. And if you read it, the Richter report, what they say about the economy, that's actually online economy. What they describe, it's amazing. But I think this is very interesting for me to have this kind of comparison, also because they are close and so far at the same time. But my point would be, it's not so much different than you may think.
I'm not sure I would want to much more to that, but obviously the point that would be interesting to do if global connections is beyond doubt. So far, I just looking through this Alan Institute. They really were not interested in anything but the GDR and something in the East, but not too far, so it was not China or. But I don't this memorandum for the advancement of Wissenschaft, which is a really thick book, and coming to Bielefeld, and there were also other institutions mentioned there, and some of them, I know that I have come across other world regions and just skimming through it. This everything I can say right now, but I assume that in the GDR they might have had also context to, I don't know, the Bruderstand
yeah, I think the international context is like this more developed framework of the problem of science and society. That, I think if you mean the international connections in this sense, then it totally makes sense. But now to jump to other institutions, I think it's not so good. It's better to look really deep into what they did, and you cannot really do that if you have too many of the institutions around. And then it was the question. Let me jump first to Karl. Many of the Starnberg people actually went to Bielefeld, so in this case it's connected. And they brought their experiences with them and so on. So there's a pretty high grade of continuity actually. And with respect to what happened to the CIF is, I think I hinted at this problem that there's a political ideology of parade that we have an agenda of Bildung, as we spoke yesterday. That's the resource of the Federal Republic of Germany. It's official. That's the main resource they have. But of course they don't give more money to educational institutions for that. So it's like Peirce said, you should rather study the behavior men betray than what they parade. And in this sense, I think it's the same with the CIF, and I think it's even it's even much more contrasted to our interest now in the Anthropocene, for example, which makes it so obvious that what, for example, they did, especially in Starnberg, but also the East Germans were already involved with the environmental problems, that it's just unbelievable that it's not, didn't have any continuity. It's not understood. This has no rational, I think it's something with ideology involved or something, I don't know, with other things. Yeah, maybe that's already too. And let me, what was it again, Gerd? Sorry.
Well, the institution that you studied seemed to take, the agenda was very much one about how do we deal with the advantage of science basically steered in the right direction, yet the practitioners seem to be so lukewarm and melancholic about it.
It's not about the lukewarmness, I'd say. Actually, the programs were pretty much forward, except for one famous case, which is von Weizsäcker. I come back to that. But with the others, it's pretty straightforward in a way. But I'm very happy about your comment, because that's actually what I want to bring to you, that this kind of public discourse and philosophical reflective discourse on the sciences was actually very much in this kind of scientific philosophy or science oriented. I mean, even the pragmatists saw themselves as, even James, which was philosophically maybe not a scientific philosopher in the strict sense, but I mean, they were philosophers of science. And it was always about, is science a project of emancipation, or is science something else, just a means for a certain group in society? I think this is very crucial, and already in the 20s, and actually this is where I'm coming from, what I studied before the 20s and 30s, the debates in the US and in Germany. Absolutely. So I'm very happy, but we can talk about the other stuff. Yeah, just shortly, von Weizsäcker, absolutely. He had a total bad conscience, and he was totally shocked. Already in 45, he was afraid to death. At least this is always like in the biographies. He was like, wow, what I have done. Because for those who don't know, von Weizsäcker was involved in the uranium project of the Nazis to build a plutonium bomb. So afterwards he was Heisenberg, I think not so much. Weizsäcker, yes. And I think a lot of his engagement came out of this, but he mostly, I'd say, turned it into a positive action, so it was not so much about bad conscience. But bad conscience maybe plays a role in respect to the MPG, the Max Planck Society. So maybe this institution was a kind of institutionalized bad conscience. Actually, it was a reflection of science. It was an institution of reflection of science, and this is actually what I found in the texts. This kind of very straightforward and very conscious approach to what they do, I found in the Sternberg guys and in the Eastern cases. They actually defined their work as a reflection which comes out of science. It's just a self-reflection, almost in Hegelian terms they said it. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you all for enduring us. We stood 10 minutes between your coffee, which is waiting for us outside. But let us also thank the speakers who really gave wonderful, for me at least, super informative papers. So.